They're just looking for someone to hold their hand. They're
Right.
just looking for someone to hold their hand through the process and show them it's all right to do that. It's all right to buy. And now's a good time, and it's going to be okay.
Welcome to Conversations with Scott Fischer, where we will discuss stories, experiences, and learnings over the past 45 years with industry leaders, friends, and dealers. From Harley-Davidson to powersports, leadership to organizational health, and everything in between. Join the conversation. Welcome back to another episode of Conversations with Scott Fischer. We're going to break down the elements of business, leadership, and making an impact in your community. It's going to be a great day today because whether you're a motorcycle dealer, a real estate operator, running a food truck park, or selling retail in whatever market you're in, we're going to talk about the ABCs of sales. And I think it's important to say that a lot of sales processes are all a particular step-by-step process, and we certainly have a lot of that to talk about. But I think that we really want to talk about how the basics of sales is really about relationships. It's really about how you create value for your customers. And we're excited today because I'm bringing along with us today an old friend, a great partner in our business, Sean Delaney, who's been with us for 22 years. Is that right, Sean? 22
22.
years?
Yeah. I
Yep.
had hair when I started.
Hair started. Well, Sean's been had a big ride with us. He came from Marine Max, and at Marine Max, Sean was a marketing director, and I was very fortunate one day with my boat broker to take a boat ride, delivering a boat from Sarasota, Florida to Fort Myers, Florida. And we said, Sean, you take the wheel. I think he was a little nervous at the time taking the wheel because he hadn't taken the wheel of a big boat before. But we got to know each other, and it was great that sometime after that, Sean and I hooked up for an opportunity to be a management role in our company. And since that time frame, 22 years, I mean, we can tell a lot of stories, but I've had Sean all over the country in all the different roles as a sales director, as a general manager, opening and closing stores. And I think what's kept Sean on top of the market has been his focus on his people, the health in our organization, and he's brutal in the sales process because we all know no matter what we sell or what we do in business, sales is a major part of that role. I mean, sales is not just selling the products that you're in business for, but it's about selling your customers. It's about selling your team. It's all about creating that great culture in your business. And it's going to be exciting today to talk about how we got to where we're at today and how you can learn some from us. I'm excited to get rolling with really just talking about our sales philosophy. I'd like to share mine and you share yours because I think it's important.
Okay. Thank you, Scott, for that introduction. I think you said it in the beginning, relationship selling, having a great group of people that work for you, that want to make customers feel welcome, that listen to what they have to say, and then ultimately selling the product that fits their needs. And then, let them really enjoy the product that they buy from us, and, keep them engaged with the product, keep them engaged with us, and ultimately sell them their next, in our case, motorcycle, or, like you said, people buy houses, people buy cars, people buy all sorts of things. So you can sell them once, but can you sell them 4 or 5 or 6 or 12 times? That's the real difference.
Right. So I think when I think about sales philosophy, and maybe I'm even jumping ahead here, but one of the things that we really learned early on from our mentors is that you got to find common ground with people when you meet them. You got to find interests that we both have, or at least share interests that we have. And I think part of the whole relationship selling is getting the customer to feel comfortable in the environment. And I think it's just so important that salespeople understand that you got to sell yourself before you can sell the product, or you got to sell your business before you sell the product, because customers are looking for the greatest value and they want to have confidence in where they're spending their money. Relationship selling, we talk about relationship selling all the time, but Sean, You've always really focused hard on relationship selling. How do you feel your salespeople build trust and loyalty with customers?
Well, first of all, it starts with the team, communication. You got to communicate well to your salespeople so they know what the values that you have are and what the values that we want to put across to our customers. And so having really great salespeople, well-trained salespeople, engaged salespeople is hard. It's hard to have those things. It's hard to grind every single day in sales. They get told no 9 out of 10 times. They have to find the 1 out of 10. And, then when they do, it's got to be celebrated. It's a hard job, And so I look at it like it's got to be from a relationship. It's got to be from the beginning, whether it starts on the internet, whether it starts on the phone. How do we treat the customer? What do we say? Are we professional? How do we look? How does the store look? How does the employee look? Are we in uniform? Do we present ourselves correctly? And then ultimately, that's the level of expectations the customers have. And so when they come in the store, they want to be treated right. They want to be treated with professionalism. They want to meet somebody that has good product knowledge, that can show them what they're looking for, and then ultimately make it easy to buy. That's got to be what it is. You got to make it easy to buy, and you can't put roadblocks up.
I think what's interesting, and you and I have said this so many times to sales teams, but when you spend the time to build value, we use that chart all the time in our sales meetings and our sales training, but when you build enough confidence in the customer, where you build value in the product, value in the business, value in yourself, value overshadows price. And it makes the sales process actually end very positive for both the customer and for the business. And, too many salespeople take for granted their product or maybe the price of their product, and they forget about the most important thing, which is value. Customers want value, and a lot of us may not think so. Even the easy buyers are still the best customers ever when they're really presented with the greatest value. And it's hard to get salespeople to spend the time. They want to jump to closing. They want to jump to pricing, to what-ifing customers so quickly. And we lose so many people that way. So one thing we want to talk about was the sales training and maybe how teams work together. And what's your position, Sean, whether you're working with one individual on your team? And this is not just salespeople, but this would be anybody on our team. But when we talk about training, well, how do you feel about training? How do you feel the training has big gaps in it in most businesses?
Yeah, we consider everybody at the store a salesperson. So let's just get that clear. If you're a technician and you're selling your labor hour, you're a salesperson. If you're the guy cleaning motorcycles and returning them back to customers, you're a salesperson. You're selling that service, because if the customer doesn't see value in that, then we don't need to wash your motorcycle before we return it back to you, and you don't have a job. So everybody in the store has a sales position. That's number one. Number two, to training. It starts with when you hire somebody. We do a pre-hire training. We do what we call a kind of like a casting call, where people come in. We explain the job. We explain what it takes. We start there. It's a little training in itself. We talk to them about the sales process. Can you do this? Can you make this many phone calls a day? Can you follow up with customers religiously? Can you do these things? And of course, 90% of people say they can. And so we then hire a group of people, let's say, and we immediately start with a new hire orientation. That's super critical to get people into the culture and to understanding what's required of them. A lot of times you start at a job and no one really tells you what you got to do. And so we got to make sure we have a really good structured first day of work. It helps people to understand what we are and what we're about. And then ultimately a good next week of training. Here's what you got to do. You got a sales training manual. You got to do this. You got to take these videos. You got to learn this. You got to do that. And, if new people have a good regimented program to get trained up, it only takes, 5 or 6 days to kind of get the basics down. Then you put them with a mentor person, someone that can mentor them a little bit, show them around, show them the ropes, where they get the paperwork. That's always very helpful too, And so it's not one person, it's a team of people that really make it happen, in training where there's gaps in training mostly happen just because they don't have any sort of training. They don't have a structured process. They don't have a training manual. They they just kind of throw people to the wolves. I mean, that happened to me when I was younger in many jobs that I had. It was like, hey, go out there and sell something, and you're like, okay, you don't know any better. So you give it a try, and you kind of learn by success or failure. And we just don't want that to happen on the floor here. We don't have enough people that come in to buy motorcycles that we can afford to lose one or two people or not listen to what they have to say and not give them a great customer experience. It just, you can't afford that.
Yeah. So I'm gonna just say that one of the things that I know that you have accomplished in every store or in every environment we're in, which is right on par with what you're talking about, is, we talk about training and we talk about continuous training and then and applying that on the floor with customers. We can really talk about how we prepare. Okay. The training, when I watch the training that you do, when I've experienced the training you do, it's really about preparing people for understanding the sales process, understanding the customer, understanding the product, understanding the environment. I mean, the environment that people work in is a very effective part of the training process, how you utilize the environment. But I think the number one thing that you do that takes people from that preparation or that training is the rehearsal. You guys are brutal about the salesmen having to get up and rehearse in front of each other. And the biggest thing for salespeople is when they're on the floor, when they're on stage, it's hard for them to really perform. And the rehearsal that you guys do, that when you guys work together, when a salesman's got to get up and rehearse in front of the other salespeople, it's tough. I mean, salesmen are challenged by that because they're in front of their peers and they've got to walk through the process and be good at it. And I have always believed that when you do a great job with that, that salesperson is so much more prepared for when he's on the showroom floor.
Yeah,
Just share a little bit of that. Share a little bit about that process because it's critically important in sales leadership.
and we're lucky because we have a pretty big sales team, so we can play off each other. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll role play and then we debrief from that role play. So you'll do, let's say, the greeting of the customer, and the guy goes first, and we have a person play the customer, and they just do a role play. It lasts about 2 minutes, and we'll joke around at how long they can stay and greet, what they can talk about. And so the first person goes, it's 2 minutes, right? And then you debrief, you say, what did you do right? What could you have done to maybe a little bit better? And what are you going to do next time, right? So that's important. So everybody hears that. And then the next person gets up and they go 3 minutes, and theirs is way better than the first person. And then by the third person, it's 4 minutes. It's spot on. It's great because they heard these two debriefs and what they would do better. And then by the time you get to the third or fourth person, they're ready to go. It's amazing. We actually did it this morning. We had a really great closers clinic where we practiced some techniques of closing, and they just get better every single time. And at first it's awkward, and you got to go through the awkwardness, and the person's nervous, and there's a bunch of people watching. But by number 3 or number 4 role play, boy, they're really spot on, really, really spot on. And then the person who went first is like, I can do that. I just messed up a little bit. I just didn't maybe think about that. So again, what did you do right? What could you do a little bit better? What are you going to do next time? And if you do that every single time, as you go through them, it gets better and better and better. And just like everything else in life, you ebb and you flow. Sometimes you do a little bit more of that in training. Sometimes you do a little bit less. You may get a sales manager that wants to talk a lot about themselves, and he kind of gets away from doing that work. And you got to get back to that all the time. We're always getting back to basics. Always got to say, look, we appreciate what you have to say, but the way the salesmen learn the most is when they role play.
Yeah. And I think the key thing there that comes out of that is coaching is so important. So we're talking about a sales team here. It could be a sales individual, but in these sales teams, coaching is so important because not all salespeople learn the same way. And a good coach, good sales manager or floor manager, or the owner of the business, whoever it might be, coaching a salesperson is so important because they need confidence. That's the key thing is when salesmen have confidence, the customer really feels that. It makes the customer feel comfortable in the buying process. And look, everybody, when they approach the sales process, when the customers approach the sales process, they want to buy a product. They're just looking for someone really to sell them something. You have to keep that in mind. And it's the preparation and the rehearsal that makes that really possible.
They're just looking for someone to hold their hand. They're
Right.
just looking for someone to hold their hand through the process and show them it's all right to do that. It's all right to buy. And now's a good time. And, it's going to be okay. And that's important. And Scott, you showed me something a long time ago when I first started. I couldn't figure out why we couldn't sell tires. And I tried this, I tried that, I tried this, I tried that. And then called you up one day and I said, man, I just can't figure out why I can't sell tires. And you said to me, you can't sell tires because you don't change them in the same day. And I go, oh, I hadn't thought about that one, right? So we started changing tires in the same day, and all of a sudden we started telling tires. And I said to you, I said, hey, why didn't you tell me? And you said, because you didn't ask. And, that's the same with salesmen. If we're not asking and letting them fail, I'd rather them fail in a role play than fail on the floor with a customer. You make mistakes, everybody does it. You say the wrong things, everybody does it. But if you can eliminate as much of that as possible by the time they hit the showroom floor, the chances are you're going to have a better sales chance of selling stuff. But they do have to fail. It is important that people do fail, and it's how you do after you fail.
And I think that's the other part, Sean. I think that for those that are listening, I think one of the really great things also is the review of yesterday's sales and the review of yesterday's customers, the wins and losses. When a sales team or a one-on-one share the experience with each other, they all learn from the experience, because every salesman is going to go through the same kind of rejection or the same kind of challenge as others at some point in time. And when people learn more about it, what are they doing? They're preparing, they're rehearsing, they're understanding what can really happen. And we want to keep salespeople from being rejected as much as possible. But unfortunately, not everybody buys that comes in today, or buys that calls today, or if we go visit houses, if we're a real estate agent or whatever, not everybody's going to buy on first bat. But the opportunity for a customer to come back or a customer to stay with the salesperson or the company is so dependent on how well the salesperson is prepared and really does build value in their career and really in their sales process, in the communication with customers, with the brand that they're selling. I mean, it's not just for you, it's not just Harley Davidson, but it's also the Thunderbird brand, the name of your dealership. Your dealership's got a reputation that's phenomenal. It happens to have a phenomenal brand, Harley Davidson, as well. So, it's great to have both. But when a salesperson is able to really leverage both of those things, it's just a critical area. And, we call this the ABCs of selling, because part of the sales process is really the salesperson and their ability to really connect with customers. And the only way they can is through preparation and rehearsal. I mean, it has to happen.
You said something at the beginning, value. We have a little chart: when value exceeds price equals a sale. So if you can, I want to say we do this really cool thing in training that is important for anyone listening. I think it's a great exercise. We sell Harley Davidson jackets, right? So in a morning sales training of motorcycle salespeople, we'll take 3 jackets, we'll hang them up in the front of the room, and we'll ask people, which one do you like? Which jacket would you buy? And so then we try to sell the person a different jacket and say, why would you want? And they never want to buy it, right? They want the one that they wanted. It's easy to sell them what they want, but we try to sell them what they don't want. And we show that as an example of, why would you try to sell somebody something that they don't want? It's very difficult. It's very easy to go, oh, this is the one you want? Put it on. Try it on. How's it feel? How's it smell? And they buy it, right? So it's just a good example, a real world example with salespeople, to just show them how important listening to the customer is and finding out what they want and sell them what they want rather than what you think they want or what you like. That's another thing. We have salesman rides a certain motorcycle and tries to sell everybody that motorcycle. It's a 25-year-old guy trying to sell a 60-year-old guy a street bog, right? It's not what that guy wants. He wants a tri-glide, but and so getting salesmen to understand, to sell the customer what they want and not what you want to sell them is really a hard thing to get across to people. But that little exercise is kind of cool to do it. And I know if you're in a different industry, someone wants to buy a house on the water, another guy wants a house locally in a farm. Try to sell each one of them the wrong one, it's just not going to happen, and you're just going to spin your wheels and waste your time.
Sean, so we've talked about preparation, we talked about selling value, the company, the brand, ourselves. Let's share a couple of stories. I'm putting you on the spot, but a couple of stories of what a salesman might do with a customer when they come in the door after they've done their meet and greet, what they might do with a customer that maybe doesn't have anything to do specifically with the product to get the customer feeling comfortable in the environment, because that's a big part of the sales process. And I don't think it has to be a showroom and motorcycle store. I think it's any kind of sales process. But is there a specific thing that you get your salespeople to do that people could take away from this and say, I could figure something like that out in my business?
Yeah, I think the big thing is that tour, we call it tour and explore, kind of show people around, is always super critical. Yeah, super critical. When someone comes in, it's just like coming over to your house. Look, you come in a Harley store, it's big, burly people. There's people with tattoos, there are people with nose piercings, and every piercing you can imagine, right? And so it's going to be a little intimidating potentially to somebody. So they come in, and I had a guy that worked for me, Big Bam. Big Bam. He has those big hands. He used to wear his bandana. He looked like he was straight out of Chino, California, which he was, but the nicest guy you ever met. And he would so disarm you by joking and showing you around and showing you the bathrooms and showing you where you could get a soda and, just making you feel so at home and making you feel welcome. That's the key. They're nervous about meeting a Harley guy or a Harley girl. And next thing you know, they're walking around and they're telling you all about themselves and they're telling you their dreams of riding motorcycles. And, it opens the door to making people feel welcome and showing around. So tour and explore. And we have a specific outline for that. We have, when you go to this area, you talk about that. When you go to this area, you talk about that. Now, they can absolutely deviate. But at least when we're there at this, where our event board is, what do we talk about at the events? How do we let people know what we have coming up and how you can ride with us and how you can be a part of what we're doing? And we not only are you buying a motorcycle, you're buying a lifestyle. You're going to grow with us. You're going to have people to ride with. And then here's our hog chapter. This is, 300 people that are loyalists of the dealership, and you can be a part of that. And this is when their meetings are. And the more we can do to get people to understand that they're not just buying a motorcycle, they're buying a lifestyle. And that's the tour helps you do that. And something as little as free cup of coffee. Look, stop in on a Saturday, have a cup of coffee, just hang out with us. Nothing more than that. And that really is important. I think really important to people. And then lastly, you introduce them to other people. They meet a technician. They meet a young lady or a young gentleman over at Motor Clothes. And they kind of have, all right, they're like me. These people are like me. We share some commonality. These are nice people. They're not big, bad, burly bikers, And I think the more you can do that in whatever industry it is, people want to be made to feel welcome in any environment that they're in.
It's so
and not a lot of people do that. I mean,
right.
Just
It's so important. By the time someone reaches the showroom floor, the customer and the salesperson have created a relationship, and there's a confidence and a value that the salesperson doing it properly naturally leads that customer to much closer to really seeing the value of their business. And I think when you take a salesperson into the service department, I'm sorry, when you take a customer into the service department, they're blown away by it. I mean, they don't get a chance. Customers aren't allowed in the service department. They're only allowed there when we're taking a tour. And when you get a technician to hold their hand out, to wipe their hand off if it's greasy and shake a hand with a customer, it's a really big deal. We take it for granted, but customers don't take it for granted. When they go to the parts department and the parts guy who knows everything about accessorizing a motorcycle talks about that's what he does. He loves his job because he gets to take your beautiful motorcycle and make it 10 times more beautiful. What's the value of that? The value is the customer is receiving more value from all the areas of the store. But after he buys, he knows the people in every department also. So it fuels the business long term. But
I don't care what you sell, because even if you're like we're talking about real estate or IT or whatever, you're always going to have relationships that need to stay together for longer than one transaction. And if you're only selling one transaction, you're selling yourself short. Because we just switched to an IT company here. And the IT company we went to, I went over their office. I saw beautiful office, how cool it was, how cool all the employees were, and it aligned with our business. So I feel good about doing business with them. These people align with us, and a really great relationship we're having just because now I know a little bit about where they are and what their offices look like. And it makes you feel good about doing business with them. And it's anything like that for anybody, add-ons and upsells. Yeah, we sell them a motorcycle, but we're going to sell them parts. We're going to sell them service. We're going to sell them motor clothes. We're going to bring them back for their next bike. We're going to bring them back for maintenance on their motorcycles. And we're going to bring them back for parties and cookouts and bands. And that's how people, that's what they want. And yeah, they say, oh, it's Harley. And no, it's any business. When I sold boats, right? When I was in that boat business, that's what it's about. It's about a lifestyle, using your product, finding other people that use the product. It's what it is.
Yeah. So that's great. So we could keep talking over and over about those different things, but I want to switch gears in a big way right here when it comes to sales and talk about something that we learned long ago and that it was the backbone of our business. It started in sales and moved into every part of our business. And that is understanding data. When we talk about data, there's data everywhere in every business. But when we talk about salespeople, we talk about data. We talk about what does it take to perform in the sales department? And because we record everything, I mean, now we are in this digital age and we have this digital ability to collect all of our data. But when we started, we had a big, long sheet, traffic log. And I mean, it used to be a foot wide and it became about 3 foot wide because we kept collecting more and more information. So what did that information do for us? One, we learned what our closing percentages were. How many customers did we have to bring into the dealership a day to sell a motorcycle? And I think at the best we ever reached was maybe about 13 or 14%. When you collect all the data, when you get your salespeople to get that information, the closing percentage is just over 10%. And we were good. Our closing percentage was good. Some people would say their closing percentage was 30, 40%, but only because they didn't record everybody. So the batting average wasn't correct. But it goes way beyond the delivery percentage. It goes beyond, if we're going to sell 10 motorcycles a week, we're going to have X amount of sales per day, which converts into how many salespeople we need. So it drove us to understand how many people do we need to staff. Beyond staffing, it then allowed us to look at the sales process and look at the data in the sales process and understand where the weakness was for every salesperson. So we used to get to the point where we'd say, look, if you would sit down more customers, you would have more write-ups. If you had more write-ups, you'd have more closes. And the more closes you get, the likelihood of delivery continues to go up. So data began to drive everything we did. And what is your thoughts around data? Or maybe what is your thoughts today around the data as compared to what it was earlier?
Yeah, I mean, how can you be a coach if you don't have data, And I think about Tom Brady. I remember I was just watching something on TV one day and they talked about how they coach Tom Brady and he throws better to his right than his left and just different little weird things that they would talk about with probably the greatest quarterback that's ever played the game, but he was constantly being coached. He was constantly having things pointed out to him and he would be hungry for that information. If he wasn't throwing as good to his left as he was to his right, then he'd go practice throwing to his left, right? So he can get, so if you don't know where your weak spots are, your blind spots are, how are you going to get better? First of all, when we have those pre-hire casting calls, I talk about that. Like, we are data driven. We are a data driven company. You will be judged on data. And how you're judged is we can't coach you unless you're being willing to be coached. So let's be open to understanding that It's a two-way street. We're going to provide data. We're going to help you to be coached, and hopefully you get better as a salesperson or as a sales manager, floor closer, whatever it might be. You're going to get better. And if you don't have tracking for that, then it's going to be real difficult to share. And so I think data drives coaching. That's how I look at it. And then, when you have a manager meeting, you're talking about everything is gray area until you get into the numbers, right? You feel this way. I understand you feel that way, but what are the numbers saying? And so when we go to the numbers, we can have a more concise conversation about what's really happening. And it eliminates a lot of the he said, she said, or the gray area things. No, this is what the data is showing right now. And you may feel that way, but the reality of it is this is what's occurring. And here are the steps you can take to get back on track. And like you mentioned, we're not sitting enough customers down. Well, if you don't sit enough customers down, you can't write enough people up, can't close, can't sell. So, where's our focus? And we may be sitting a ton of people down and we're not closing. And maybe that's where the number is that we need to talk to. Or maybe our closers haven't had a good training in a while. Maybe they're not encouraged. Maybe they're not enthusiastic. So let's get with them and help them to be encouraged and do a better job.
So Sean, let's just go through a little exercise here. Next month, your budget is 100 units. Okay. So next month, your budget's 100 units and you have a 10% delivery. So you're actually delivering 1 out of 10 customers. I mean, that's the number that we have. So if you're going to sell 100 motorcycles, how many customers do you need to sell 100 motorcycles?
Got to have 1,000 customers on the log, right? So
it's a pretty simple item. So we're talking about data, and I want people to understand how simple it really can be. So we're preparing for next month. Our budget is we're going to sell 100 units. We got our budget because we sold 110 last year and 100 the year before, so we should be able to sell 100 this year. So in order to do that, we need 1,000 customers. So if we have 1,000 customers, how many salespeople do we need?
You figure every salesman's going to greet 5 people a day. If they work 20 days a month, you need 10 salesmen. Now, I always say it's 10 plus 1. So it would be 1 point. Take whatever the number is and times it by 1.1 because salesmen call out sick, somebody dies, they got in a car wreck, got in a motorcycle accident, whatever. So you always have to have 1 more than what you think you're going to need. So if you need 10, you really need 11. So you have 11 salesmen, and if they all greet, and look, the positive of that is maybe they greet 1,100 people and you sell 110 motorcycles. A lot of times that's what makes the difference is how many salesmen you have available to greet people on the floor. And it becomes a little bit of a numbers game because if you don't, you can't make enough phone calls, you can't do enough text messages, you can't do enough outbound activity to drive those 1,000 customers to the store. And that's really what it comes down to. You got to have enough people to do the work that it takes to get people to the store.
Yeah. So if sales teams would do that fundamental exercise, there's a couple of really great things that come out of that. We need 1,000 customers. If our customers aren't coming through the front door, well, first of all, if we acknowledge we're not staying on track to reaching 1,000 customers, it takes the focus from the sales team or the dealership to drive more customers. It drives action items inside the store. Data is so important because if we're falling behind, if the graph is declining from volume, we've got to figure out how to pick the volume up. So that's one of the great purposes of having data so that you can really drive those issues like that. And most dealerships or most businesses don't start their business with that kind of information. And so if you don't staff properly, you're never going to hit, if you don't know your delivery percentage and you don't staff properly, you don't understand how many customers you need, you can never hit your goals. And we would oftentimes tell sales managers, say, look, you don't have enough people on board, so there's no way we're going to hit our budget this month. So there's a level of accountability that happens when you have data. You're able to spread it a lot.
Can I give you a great story of that?
Yep.
Harley Davidson dealer visited me from California, and they were remodeling their store, and they came out, and we did that exact exercise. And I said, how many bikes do you anticipate the new store selling and blah, blah, blah. And I go, well, how many salesmen do you have currently? Well, we have 2. I said, so you probably sell currently about 16 motorcycles a month, right? They go, yeah. And we're about to go into a huge facility and all this. I said, well, how many salesmen are you going to have? They're like, probably 3 or 4. I said, so you're going to sell 32, right? And they're like, what do you mean? We're going to sell 100. I go, you're not going to sell 100 with 4 salesmen. And they stuck to their 4 salesmen, and they sold that store to one of our friends, and that's the number 1 store in the United States. And why? Because they put enough salesmen on the floor, and they sold a whole bunch of motorcycles, where the old owner who sold it ran with 4, the new owner ran with 20, and guess what? They sold 160 motorcycles a month versus the 32. So it's absolutely basic of most basic. And the old owner who sold the store and was quite frankly in financial trouble, he just would not acknowledge the most basic of sales philosophies. Got enough people to get them on the log, to get them in the sales department. So
yeah, we're talking about the sales department, but if you look at how we've used data to try and build processes and systems in all of our areas of business, and I mean, as simple as in the retail side of the business where we sell motor clothes and all that stuff, there's a volume of business that happens, and it takes X amount of customers, X amount of employees to do that. Employees sell about $25,000 a month in your store. I believe that number is about correct, $25,000 to $30,000 a month. If you have a $100,000 budget, you can't start the month with 2 salespeople, with 2 retail people. You've got to have 3 or 4 people. So data is so important when it comes to sales, because sales isn't just about a process. It's not just about relationship. It's about the preparation that you have the right team ready to meet that budget.
To meet that requirement. Yeah. And that's a lot of times gets departmental managers in trouble. They don't have enough people, and then they wonder why they fall short of their goal. And then the opposite too is in a downward trajectory. You might have had a great year, or something might have happened, something may change, and then you're in a down year and you're overstaffed and you're not modifying to keep pace with maybe a downward trend. And then what happens to you in that situation? Look, an upward trend, it's easy because if you're understaffed, you're still probably making good money. Maybe instead of selling 8, they're selling 10. Yeah. Are you leaving some stuff on the table? Absolutely. But you're probably looking pretty good. It's the downward sales trend that could occur that really bites a store in the butt, or dealership or any business in the butt, is they can't correct quick enough. They got to correct quick enough so that they're, because expenses as a percentage of sales really, really, really expand when there's a little bit of a downward trend. Mm-hmm. And if you're not quick to fixing that, then it can really be a bite.
Yeah. So there's a lot we could talk about with data, because it's everything. It's how businesses are bought. It's how businesses are run. It's how we train people, how we hire and fire people. It's unbelievable. So we've really talked about preparation and rehearsal and data as ABCs of selling, because, we have to prepare people. We have to rehearse it. We have to understand the data so we know how many people we have and how to do that. I want to talk about one more thing before we end, and that's the newest part of sales right now, which has become more and more the most critical area, and that's the digital side of sales. Our customers are now starting their journey online, and it's not just in our industry. It's in every industry. They're starting their journey online. Sean, tell us, what does it take? Because you clearly are one of the better digital motorcycle dealers in the country. There's a handful of really good ones. There always is. And we're not at the top. We're just doing a good job, and we're understanding it, and we're investing and learning about it. We're great students of that business. But what's making it happen? What are businesses not doing that they should be doing in the digital side?
Well, this is another thing. It ebbs and flows, right? It changes. It constantly changes. So we do have a great process, but we're constantly looking to modify, looking at how we can get a little bit better here and there. But it doesn't change at all to what we talked about at the beginning, which is customers want to deal with somebody that they like, that they trust and like. And how do you get people to trust and like you on the internet? How do you get them to say, man, I want to do business with that location. I want to do business with that person. Number one, got to be quick. Someone puts in a digital lead or something happens where they are on there and they click a little widget and it asks for their stuff, or they do a chat box or whatever. It can come from so many different places. But reality of it is they want to be responded to quickly, right? They want not instant. I mean, it need to be instant. Great if it is instant, but they want somebody they can talk to. They see a bike online, they see a car online, they see a house online. They want to talk to somebody as quickly as possible, right? And so that's super critical. And it doesn't change. I don't think it changes much from the perspective of customers want to deal with somebody that they like. So can we get somebody that they like in contact with them as quickly as possible? Can we answer their questions? Because normally they have questions. They're in the early parts of their inquiry. So can we answer their questions? Can we get them information? Can we communicate with them? Can we send them a video? Can we introduce ourselves? What can we do to do, like when the customer comes in the store, we just mentioned you take them on a tour. But on the internet, how do you take them on a tour when you're not in the store? How can you make them feel the same things, all the things they're going to get? What can we do? And ultimately, we want to get them in the store, but you got to build a relationship from the beginning. And so quick to the lead, good follow-up, good discussion with the customer, answering as much questions as we can, sending them pertinent information, letting them know that we're the place that wants to do business with them, and hopefully get them in here and ultimately sell them a motorcycle.
So I think it's good. In recapping that, obviously we've been in the digital business for some time now, not just in our dealerships, but in for service business. And there are some real facts that exist in digital. One, the biggest fact that we know for sure is customers start their journey online. I mean, the reality of it today is if I'm in my boat and I see another boat in a brand, the first thing I do when I think about that boat, what that boat is, I go to my phone. I mean, the reality is most of it's being done on a phone, and they go for information on it. And when you do that, you're starting your journey. We know for sure that leads need to be answered in about a 5-minute time frame. If it's possible in your business, if you can answer leads in a 5-minute time frame, the customer is still in the journey and you're connecting with them when they're there. The reason why I bring this up is I don't think it's just our industry. I think it's most industries. One, the businesses don't invest in digital management. Okay. Digital management is how are we going to position our website? Are we going to understand our web leads? Are we going to understand our web traffic? They don't really invest. They look at it as an expense, and it's not an expense. And then it's an investment to understand what you have. And then you have to invest in people, because our sales team out there are not the people to answer leads. Unfortunately, salespeople in any industry, they got customers. They got deals they're preparing, perhaps for delivery, for the sale, for financing. They're busy working the business they have. Lead management needs to be done by separate people, and it's an investment to do it. What's the value of it? The value of it, first of all, is there's a very high percentage, almost the same percentage of lead conversion as there is in walk-in conversion. It's almost the same. The other major benefit is what sales team in an organization wouldn't love having pre-qualified customers? If someone goes through the digital process and goes and starts their journey and makes an appointment and shows up, they're so much more likely the buyer than anybody else walking through the door. So, the digital business is when we talk about the ABCs, we talked a lot about the basics of sales, and it all flows into the digital side, but businesses aren't yet investing in the people to do the ABCs on the digital side. You just have to be better prepared for digital. And it's not about spreading the digital leads out to the salespeople, because salespeople are still going to go for the front door first. When someone walks in the door, and we want them to, okay? We don't want customers standing around the showroom. Can you imagine? We try to make the comparison. If a customer walks around a showroom of any kind for any period of time and doesn't get help, well, what's their position when they leave? It's very negative. When we go online and we ask for more information and no one follows it up, what do they think? The same exact thing. So it's such an important part of the process. And we keep getting, like you said, we're good students. We keep learning more and more about it. And as we move down the road, we'll share more information about what we learn. But Sean, look, in closing, I guess maybe one of the things I'd ask you that you could end us with is, maybe what's your biggest win in sales? If you can think of what one of your biggest wins is in sales.
I think my biggest wins in sales is when I hear other people saying the things that we've said for so long, whether I'm at expo or I'm at something. And, it's just great to hear other people sharing in some of the thoughts and using some of the things that we use for a long time. Because, look, we're not the end all be all, but it's very, very fun to hear other people talking about the dealer tour, other people talking about the things that we do with digital. And then it just makes you feel good that you made an impact in the industry, you made an impact in the world, and helped other people out, So yeah, I could probably tell you about when I sold $1 million yacht, or that's temporary stuff. It's developing people, developing great people that can have a good lifestyle, make a good living, move up in the world. And to me, those are the biggest wins that we can have. People getting better, growing. There's nothing better than that.
That's great. I think what Sean just shared there is that selling isn't just about making money. It's about understanding people, providing real value, and building relationships. And it doesn't matter what business you're in. It's the same thing. And for those of us that are entrepreneurs or sales managers or whatever, everywhere you go, you kind of see this in businesses. You kind of critique perhaps how they perform or how they could perform better, especially when they're not performing well. Or when they do perform well, you look at it and say, wow, we could do some of that in our business. And that's just understanding what creates value. So I hope you get something out today. Sean, appreciate your help on this. It's great. And we're not selling books or have sales manuals or anything, training programs, but we love the sales into the business. We focus on it hard. And I think that we have a lot to share with anybody who's moving in the road of sales.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yep. We appreciate you being with us today. We appreciate the audience listening today. And if you have any further interest, just give us a ring. We'd love to help.
Thank you. Talk to you later.